In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to knit the shawl or the scarf that I'm wearing right now. This Aran shawl that's knit with a traditional Irish fisherman's kind of a pattern to it. And the reason that I chose this is because we're working in a rectangle in a scarf shape, it's a good way to learn all of these twists and turns and different stitches without having to worry about the shaping of a sweater as well. So this is the Aran shawl, and if you'd like to follow along with this pattern, it's available for purchase and download over at VeryPink.com. Now, if you, a couple of ideas here, if you wanted to make this more of a shawl, you can make it wider just by extending what we have here as the border stitches, or if you want to make it a bit more masculine, you can narrow that down a bit. Or the last thing you could do with this rectangle is to make several of them and seam them together in panels to make an afghan. And I have an example here of one. It's a lot. I've never had an afghan on front of the camera like this before, but this is an afghan that I knit years ago in panels, just like this scarf is. And the dogs have had their way with this afghan for several years. It happens to be their favorite afghan, and I put fringe on the end of it too to make it kind of extends the length of it a little bit. So lots of things you can do with Aran knitting. A little bit of history with Arid Knitting is that the Aran Islands are a few miles off the coast of Ireland, and that's where Aran knitting is said to come from. There is an old story that each one of these designs is actually a family design. And so the women would knit these sweaters for their sons and husbands to wear out and if fishing on fishing boats. And if their bodies were lost at sea, their bodies could be identified by the patterns knit into the sweater. Well, the more I read about this, the more it sounds like this is probably a myth, although the patterns, the different patterns that you see in Aran knitting do sometimes trace back to regions, not necessarily families, but regions. Also, when you see an Irish fisherman's knit like this, you'll usually see it in natural undyed wool, and that is traditional. The wool normally used for this patterns in sweaters is undyed and unscoured, I think is what they call it, where it still has all of the lanolin in the wool. So the sweater ends up being nearly waterproof after it's knit. So you hardly ever see an Aran sweater in a bright color. It's all these undyed, unbleached, natural colors. And the yarn that I'm using is actually dyed and bleached, but it mimics the color of natural wool, and which is why I used it. It's also kind of a heavy worsted Aran. So if you are following along with the pattern that I'm using, I want to show you how to get started with your cast on. And if you take a look at your pattern, the top part of the pattern, well, this is all your chart and everything, but the top part of the pattern here shows you the order in which all of the stitches go by the chart. So you have chart A on the outside, and going in we have B, C, B with the center of D, which is this diamond pattern. So what I want you to do to cast on is to cast on 10 stitches, which is chart A, place a marker, 2 stitches, place a marker, 6, place a marker, 2, place a marker. Continue that all the way across, and I will work through some of this with you. Be sure to leave yourself plenty of tail when you're casting on using the long tail cast on. So the first thing I'm going to do is chart A. Whoa. 7, 8, 9, 10. Place a marker. I just want to go over this to make sure it's clear. Cast on 2. Place a marker. Just like that, all the way across, following the pattern. And then we'll be ready to work the next row. One thing I do want to tell you is that we're working charts A, B, C, and D, 4 different charts. You are going to have to keep track with 4 different row counters here. You can probably drop 2 of those off at some point, but you are going to have to keep track of the other 2 for sure. And there is an application that I like to use. It's an iPhone application called Stitchminder, which will let you keep track of 4 things at once. You can also use just 2 regular manual stitch counters, which is fine, or you can have 4 different blocks of space for 4 different tally mark boxes or something. Just make sure you're keeping track of each chart's row, which they'll hardly, only like every 5 pattern repeats will they ever match up, so you need to keep track of the row. Anyway, do your cast on, place your markers, and I'll see you back here when we will work chart A together.